6:04. And with that, our first agenda topic is the thing we discussed for about 30 seconds last time, which is the street lighting and traffic device maintenance services, and whether to hire on, hybrid, contract out, or do some sort of a hybrid model. So with that, Leanne, maybe if you could walk us through kind of each of those three options and kind of pick up where we left off. I know it was really hurried last time, and we kind of
Yeah.
sort of almost came to a consensus, but it's been a long 2 weeks. So maybe we just do a little bit of a recap and a review.
Yeah. And I feel like I gave you, lots of information in way too short of a time frame. So I apologize for rushing through that last week or at our last meeting. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just start the discussion and invite Joel to jump in at any time, just with a brief overview of the duties of that particular position. It's title electrician. That's really a historical title. Actually, at the time that I started with the village, we had 2 people that had this same position and shared the job duties. Now we have 1. The primary duties, as you might imagine from the title, are the maintenance of the street lighting system and the traffic control signal system. In 2020, the labor hours on that were just over 900 for street lighting and about 20 for traffic signals. There's actually very little on a daily basis that needs to be done to maintain the signal system. But there is quite a bit of work that goes into street lighting. And part of the reason that in our case, we have to put more effort into it than some modern communities might is the type of system that we have. We have a 480 volt direct vary system. It's 2-pair wire and there is no ground, it's ungrounded. So what that means to people who, as I like to say, don't speak electrician, and that's me, is that anytime there's any type of work or excavation or general ground movement to this cabling system, it's very susceptible to damage because it is just directly buried in the ground. So that makes it both susceptible to damage, and it does cause some safety concerns for the lay person.
So Leanne, just to understand it, because I'm kind of curious, and we do have an hour and a half, so I feel like I can, like, so I can ask like kind of curiosity questions.
Yep, you can.
So
I
like
have too. Curious.
the cabling is directly into the ground.
Yep.
There's no like protective sheath around it. It's just cables running through our.
Well, I mean, there's a kind of probably like a fibrous sheath on the cable, but it's not in conduit. So it is not encased in like a hard,
And
so
someone in the 70s thought this would be a good idea for the village to go with the freeway lighting model.
I think it predates the 70s, but at the time that the
system, in the context.
Yeah, at the time that the system was installed, I don't think it was exceedingly uncommon. My understanding is that parts of the city of Milwaukee have a similar system. Nobody would build one like that today, but we could say that about a fair amount of Shorewood's infrastructure, right?
Right.
So you might recall
with this for how long? Like, I was going to look through the long-range financial plan. I didn't have time. When are we scheduled to replace our street lighting system?
We replace cable every time we do an infrastructure project that involves the removal of curb.
Oh.
Most of the time we do it because we have to, because it invariably is removed when we do excavation for street work and pull curbs. But that has become a standard practice since I started as director. So we've probably been doing that for 12 or so years now.
How close are we to being
Um,
50?
It will, if we continue at the current pace, you probably will need another 2 directors after me to get through it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Two after. Oh,
so
wow.
to replace, you're saying we're maybe 10 to 20% into the replacing and updating our streetlights?
Certainly no more than that.
No more than 10 to 20.
Yeah.
So in other words, this is a highly specialized position with highly specialized knowledge in very old electrical wiring and quite dangerous due to the fact that our wires are simply buried underground without any kind of protected sheath and ungrounded.
Right.
Okay.
So this past Friday evening, we received an after hours call from the police department that a resident had called with a concern. That was you? Awesome. Outstanding. One of the street lights.
We had no street lights. I
Yeah.
do the night.
Well, no. And the reason that you had no streetlights is because prior to that, we received a call that one of the streetlight poles was actually smoking.
Oh my God.
And I think there was someone that was concerned, you know, and the reason, and Joel, please jump in, that I believe it was smoking is due to the fact that the cabling leading into the pole was compromised in some way, and because it wasn't grounded, it was causing the pole to smoke. Is that correct?
Sorry, I don't want to take us too far down a rabbit hole, but just was there a safety concern for anyone coming into contact with the pole, or was it all ensconced within the pole itself?
There was not, because the concrete or the pole is concrete.
Good.
That kind of negates the safety concern. If that was a metal pole, for instance, that would be a different story.
Okay, well, good. Well,
Yep.
good. I'm glad that.
And that has,
Saved by the ugly concrete poles. Let the record show.
yeah. And so that has happened. We've received calls after hours that, for example, parking signs were smoking. And that obviously would be a significant safety concern. So the electrician actually responded after hours and had to shut the circuit down. And that's why you had no streetlights for the weekend.
So kind of directing us back. So now that we've kind of
So we're back.
laid the groundwork.
So that's just a little bit of a backstory explanation as to why you know, we're making a recommendation that if this position is to remain in-house, that the candidates for the position be certified electricians, or at least have some significant educational training and background.
And I just, we had discussed that I think Wesley and I have both agreed, and I believe Trustee Bockhorst, that we thought it was important to have one certified electrician on the village staff. I guess the issue is finding that person that's going to fit this. You know, it sounds like we're trying to find someone with a unique skill set, because we're putting a lot into a little sort of like with our construction manager person, right?
It could be, I mean, or it might not, you know, I think that's just something that we wanted to point out, that typically those aren't things that you would necessarily expect. You know, those aren't skill sets or interests that you would necessarily expect one person to bring to the table.
Oh.
They might, you know, we may very well find a candidate or multiple candidates, but I think I just want everyone to be prepared that isn't necessarily what we would expect.
Just
doesn't mean it can't happen.
And just to put on the record, Trustee Bockhorst has joined us at 6:13. I neglected this, my fault. I neglected to say at the beginning of the meeting, Trustee Bockhorst informed us that she was going to be a little late, and now she is on the call. So just a little bit of housekeeping cleanup there.
All right. So that provides a little bit of background about that that particular portion of the job duty. I think the other one that is related to that, that I don't think we talk about very often with the board, is the responsibilities for utility locating. The village is a member of Diggers Hotline, and I know we've all heard the advertisements, call before you dig, and we highly recommend that people do that. What that actually means for us is that every time someone calls in any type of a job, we get what's referred to as a ticket from Diggers Hotline, or an explanation of the call, a work order, and our electrician and one of our sewer utility and water utility employees have to go out and mark whatever area the caller has identified in their request. It may have nothing at all to do with the electrical system. It may have nothing at all to do with the water or sewer, but we still have to mark all of our underground utilities in the area that's been designated. That is a considerable amount of time across those 3 tasks annually. We're really close to a full-time equivalent, one person. One person does not do all the marking because they have to have an understanding of the system and where things are located. But if you add up the hours of the 3 different people that do that, we're approaching an FTE.
Trustee Stokerbrand?
So that's a misunderstanding on my part. I thought when I saw people showing up with the spray paint can, I always thought I didn't see a DPW vest or a DPW truck. Are there other I'm seeing, or
there are? Yep. So We Energies also marks gas. They mark gas and electric. Phone is marked. Cable is marked. Any other type of communication lines are marked. So on any given job, you will have generally at least 7 different underground infrastructure categories that are marked.
So do you think that's something you could farm out, or would you rather keep that in-house? What's your preference?
I think there are benefits to both. I think that, and Joel and I have discussed this quite a bit. Currently, our record system is probably not at a level that we could very easily hand it over to a contractor and just say, here you go, have at it. We've been working for the last couple years, and it will likely take a couple more at least to really make sure that we have accurately combined all of our paper records and all of our different system mapping records into something that someone with absolutely zero knowledge of our village or our infrastructure systems could accurately mark those systems. So it's something that I think we are and probably should be working toward, but we're quite a bit away from that yet.
So is it accurate to say that just contracting out, that is an option, is not your preferred option? We can't just send it off someplace. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for our staff having that knowledge and having that understanding of the systems. I think we lose a bit of that when we're not, when we're not involved in that or thinking about that on a daily basis, which it's a daily basis that we're marking. Actually, I probably would just defer that question because at this point it's not a possibility. Like I said, we have some work to do on bringing all of our mapping up to a place that we would even be able to think about doing that.
Got it. Trustee Bockhorst?
Yeah, and I would say that I'm probably the least amenable to constantly looking to farm out or outsource our internal operations. So I just want to say this because I want DPW to know that my voice too here is that I understand that the importance of having in-house staff, and that sometimes the cost associated with outsourcing creates more work, costs more money for our village and our taxpayers, and also the level of, but not always. I mean, there are times that we can look for efficiencies in that, but I'm going to say that I will say that outsourcing and farming out, those buzzwords to me do not necessarily mean, yay, let's do that. I'm not looking necessarily to do that. And also back to what you said, Leanne, regarding the utilities and telecom and stuff like that. and I get this at my day job too, because my boss is the chair for the Public Works. So we're constantly dealing with a lot of things, and big, I forget, telecom being one of the big things with 5G, and the state's what is it called? Usurpation of local control regarding what we can regulate. So there are a lot of difficulties, and a lot of times people assume that when their front lawn is torn up or their side streets or wherever they're going in, that was a DPW project. So I think it's really incumbent upon us as board members to really understand those differences, as well as to help educate and communicate that to the public. Because a lot of times, I'm sure you get these calls all the time, Leanne, right?
Oh, Joel is the expert in that, for sure. And he loves it. It's his favorite thing in the world.
Great.
So Trustee Stokebrand, I have you next in the queue.
My question is, when we hire this new construction manager, will that addition help improve those maps more quickly that you say we need to do if we wanted to outsource this? Because it seems to me that like some of the low hanging fruit would be marking village utilities. And I would rather have someone working with our intricate and too expensive to replace lighting system if I had to look at allocation of resources. And so I'm just wondering if this new person will help you meet your mapping requirements more quickly.
That's certainly something that we've included in their duties and job description. Yeah, I think that will certainly be a help.
So my question is this, and maybe it's more of a statement, when I initially read the packet, I was of the mindset, this is very specialized work. It's going to be difficult to find someone to do it. And in addition, this role takes on a number of different other village responsibilities. So therefore, my initial read was, let's just keep it. It seems like, the combination of specialized work and other responsibilities means keep it. But Leanne, I think I don't know if you and I talked to committee or had a conversation before setting the agenda, but I remember it being somewhere brought up that there was also a liability concern with keeping it in-house because it was so old and completely different than what other municipalities are using. Will you talk a little bit about that, and if you see a greater benefit to being hybrid rather than just a fully kind of in-source is not a word, but a position that we hire for?
Sure. Like I said, it's a unique system. There are definitely some safety concerns. It's really important, I think, that we can't just leave it to just anyone. It has to be someone who has an electrical background or electrical training. We might be very successful at finding a candidate like that. If we are not, then I think that's a further conversation. I'm not really willing. It's not really a learn it on the job type of thing. Certainly not in the time frame that we have available before the electrician retires. If we had a year or two, we might. But I think, if we're talking months, I don't think that is probably the ideal way to proceed or the ideal option. I think there are definitely in this particular position, I think there are certainly some benefits to outsourcing the some of the work. Some of it's relatively easy and can be handled in-house with the vehicles and equipment that we have. But some of the faults, identifying, locating the faults and fixing those knockdowns, if a vehicle hits a traffic light or a traffic signal, there's obviously some safety concerns there, both for the employee and everyone in the vicinity. We laid out in the memo 3 different options, one of them being simply a direct hire replacement, one of them being contracting the electrical portions of the job out, which it has, each of those have some positive positive elements and some real challenges. Obviously on the contracting, then we still have the other half of the duties that we have to address and how we take care of that. If it's a direct hire, we have that concern about, whether they have, what kind of candidates we're going to find who are also interested in snow plowing and maintaining signage and barricades and that sort of thing. And that's really why we put together that third, which we kind of called the hybrid option, which would, potentially explore the contracting of the more concerning electrical related activities. So identifying and repairing those faults, addressing and dealing with the knockdowns, but then keeping the other duties in-house, the sign maintenance, the replacement of bulbs and streetlight bulbs, replacing poles, doing all of the special event setup and the traffic coordination. And then the thought was that perhaps the other half of that position responsibility that's sort of been vacated if you contract the electrical could be used to support the vehicle maintenance position. So essentially you would have a full-time mechanic and then kind of someone who would float, wouldn't necessarily be a mechanic, but would be mechanically inclined and would float between the garage and then sign maintenance, street light bulb changes, special event setup and coordination, that sort of thing.
Yes, so if you don't mind, I'm trying to put a fine point on this. So when I read through the packet, and maybe this was just my reading too quickly, but yeah, my question was, how would we absorb that the kind of half role? And so the solution then is, with that mechanic that's still hanging out there, that we had wanted to look into contracting, we still have that kind of position. So we would take that position and use it for half mechanic and half the stuff that the electrician would work on, and also have the electrician position contracted out, the major stuff in that position contracted out, the more specialized stuff. So in other words, we're not increasing headcount, we're just reallocating, and the mechanic becomes a half and half.
Right.
And the electrician is contracted out.
Yeah, that is one option. I think, to be very candid, I don't expect that to be a cost saving option.
Sorry to interrupt. Is it a cost neutral option?
Probably not. If we were able to say that we would no longer send any work out of the shop, I think I'd be a little more comfortable saying it's close to a cost neutral option. But the reality of it is that, if we have one trained mechanic and one person who's mechanically inclined, there's still going to have to be things that are going to get sent out. And so that shop budget is still going to be higher than it would have been if we just had two mechanics.
Okay. So there will be, sorry, I lost my feed. So there will be, so if we were to go, if we were to kind of do the reorg option, I'll call it that, we could face somewhat of an increased cost. I guess my question then becomes, and sorry, Trustee Stokebrand, Trustee Backhorst, let me know if you've, I'm sorry to ask a bunch of questions in a row. What is most beneficial for DPW in terms of function of the department, in your opinion? Just putting aside cost, thinking we'll work through all that. What makes the department function most efficiently?
I think, if I'm very honest, that answer largely depends on what time of year you're asking me the question. In the winter, my answer will always be as many people as we can possibly have access to, right? In the summer, in the height of summer, if we're in a non-COVID year and we're doing tons of special events and block parties and addressing street closures, we need somebody who is fully responsible for that type of thing, so we know it starts and stops right here. To spread that over multiple people, I think invites and involves some confusion. You know, maybe if you asked me in the spring of the year, or maybe even late fall, you know, my answer might be different. It's difficult because what we do is so very seasonal. So that's my way of answering the question without actually answering the question. That's tough. Like I said, it really depends on what time of year you're asking me. Can we do it at 18 in certain times of year? Yes, we can. Can we say, am I confident we can do everything everyone expects of us at all times of year with 18? I don't think we can. We're doing our best and we're seeing how it goes, but it's been tough this winter. It's not gonna lie.
Thank you. Trustee Stokebrand?
So has it been tough this winter because of the heavy snows?
That certainly doesn't help. Yeah. And this, I think, is going to be an agenda topic for a future date. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on it now, but you know, we really have to plan very differently for our winter response based on the type of storm that's predicted. And when we have a storm that is a lake effect event, we really have to be very strategic about how we deploy those personnel resources. We can only have people in a plow for up to 16 hours. And I don't think anybody really even probably wants someone in a plow for a full 16 hours.
No.
But that at times is unavoidable. I mean, if we have an event that a snow event that extends 20 hours or more, and we've had them, we have to get very creative about how we respond and how we prioritize. And we just don't have enough people to run back-to-back full-on winter operations and anything that extends over a day.
So basically you can't do more than one 24-hour cycle. But I think the question here,
not much more than that, not to do everything that we typically do when we do a plowing event.
Well, clearly if there's
really
a snow emergency disaster, you have to do what you have to do. And, we trust you to prioritize, and what's most important for public health and safety, and, aesthetics would come later and things like that. But I think the question here is not, we all agree that we want this job replaced with benefits. The question is just what do you put for the job description? Like, do we have a date? When is this electrician actually retiring?
He has not given us a specific calendar date. He has indicated it will be in the first half of the year. And since we are rapidly approaching the end of the first quarter, I would expect that to be within the next 3 or so months. So I really, I think it's imperative that we get some consensus or direction from the committee on how you'd like us to proceed. If we were to keep the position in-house basically as is, advertise and hire for the position, it would really, really be my preference that we have some kind of overlap. We have historically not done that. We've made the request, but historically boards have not granted that request to have two people in the same position so one of them can learn. But the reality of it is that he's one guy and he's super, and there's a lot of stuff in his head that we need the opportunity to download, or we will, it's going to be really challenging.
Like training, what do they call it? Succession training?
Yeah, I mean, ideally we would have begun that well over a year ago. And frankly, we did start that. Our succession plan at the time was that the current mechanic would be the backup there, and he was trained to be the backup. with the loss of the other mechanic position, he now is not available to us. So the time that we spent and kind of that data download really can't be accessed because we cannot, we just don't have the luxury to pull
So
him
that
out of the
mechanic
gap.
doesn't want to slide over to this job.
No, well, not on a permanent basis, no. And even on a temporary basis, we can't take him out of the garage because then we have 0 mechanics. And if our fleet doesn't work, we don't work.
Yeah.
So,
I would
yeah,
I would be in favor of overlapping, putting out the job opening, and I would recommend to the board, if the committee agrees, to allow some overlap time because of the sensitive nature of the unique nature of the job responsibilities. If the succession plan fell apart, then I think that's what we need to do. We have to allow what do you want, Leanne? Do you want a month or a 6-week or 2 months? If you think he could be gone the first half of the year,
yeah.
that leaves us at what, May?
Well,
We need
yeah,
some.
I don't know. Joel, do you have?
I don't know, like you said, he hasn't given us a date, but I anticipate him being gone by the end of June. And so, if you're going to have proper succession training, you really need to have someone to go through certain processes with that individual, right? So, okay, what kind of time frame does that take? I'm thinking like a month minimum would allow that person to, change light bulbs and then street lights and find faults and do all these kind of things. I mean, I think a month would be a minimum good start.
So Trustee Stokebrand, your recommendation, just trying to make sure that I have it, is to hire for this position and to make sure that we do have some overlap. So, it's obviously not going to be perfect, but they'll get through a few processes and be able to be somewhat up to speed when they start.
Correct. So I would move that we post this position as soon as possible. And hopefully the person in this position has been here how long? Over 20 years?
Yeah,
It would be nice if the person would let us know as soon as possible, right? I mean, I find it really unusual that someone is, well, anyway. Yeah, I would make a motion if that's what we need, that we put out for.
I don't think, are we making motions right now, Trustee Warren? Because I think we should have I'd like to discuss a little bit before we do that.
Trustee Stokebrand, would you mind holding your motion for?
Sure, we can discuss after a motion is made too, but I'm happy to wait.
I understand that, but we also, I like to look at things comprehensively instead of piecemeal, and we've made so many piecemeal decisions. And I guess what I was going to ask before you make a motion, because it's a lot easier to do so versus amending the motion, was if this was amenable to both Joel and Leanne here, or if you had a different suggestion regarding this. We've really tinkered a lot with DPW as a board, and we're not experts. And I understand that's not the typical way that we deal with these kind of situations. It's a very new kind of strategy. So, but if they're fine with this, then I just want to make sure that we don't mess it up again, because we've done it a couple times.
And Trustee Stokebrand, if you don't mind me, I would have the same question. Your motion sounds good to me, and I think I want to second it, but I would ask, that would be the question I would ask, if you don't mind us asking Leanne that.
Go for it.
Leanne, the floor is yours, Leanne.
thank you. Yeah, I think it is definitely worth exploring. I would like to, I guess, go on record. That's a little strong, but just kind of remind you that if we hire for or post this position and don't find a suitable candidate, I think we kind of have to circle back and have a discussion about, we will have to circle back and have a discussion about how we address those streetlight maintenance requirements in the short term, or maybe that turns out to be long term. But I think it really depends on what kind of candidate pool we end up looking at. But I'm very open to exploring that.
Okay. Well, I mean,
Joel?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I mean, I think my ideal situation would be to bring on a qualified, knowledgeable electrician type of person. You know, it's been said a couple different ways now, but I think the concern is that we may not. My feeling is there's a good chance we're not going to find that type of person within our structured pay ranges. And, you add that to additional duties such as snow plowing and these kind of things that, like, if we're going to look for an electrician, electricians don't do that kind of stuff. So, my ideal world, yes, we have someone like that on staff. The concern is we don't find that. And then, the backup then is we're going to have to go out to RFP to a contractor that can address those kind of issues. And all that stuff takes time. So yes, there's risk moving forward with, trying to fill a position. But we just don't know. I guess I don't know what the market is out there for those type of people. Truth be told, we have been having difficult time, recruiting to fill some of these other positions. So I'm kind of concerned about that.
Trustee Warren? Yeah, at the city, same thing. The pay ranges are really low. And if they were to compound it with a multitude of other kind of less desirable for your training kind of maybe, I mean, that might not be the best way to put it, but just outside of your scope, it can be quite difficult. So, and I understand we're a small organization. There's a lot of cross training and a lot of other things, but anyway, I appreciate the information that you gave. Thank you.
And from my perspective, I mean, I guess, I'd like to preserve the position. I'd like to kind of, have the position because it sounds like it does a bunch of different things. I mean, is there any way to just kind of expedite our search and come back here? If if it's not happening, then come back here as quickly as we can, and we'll reconfigure what we're doing. I mean, is that a possibility?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we could certainly, we could work to put together a job, review the job description. We could post the job. Typically, we come back to the board or we ask that of the board before we post, not generally after. But I guess we would post the position and then see what kind of candidates we get. And if we, that all works, then we would take it to the full board and ask for the authorization to hire. A little backwards, but given the time, we could proceed in that manner.
I mean, I guess I'm okay with that. It still gives the board an opportunity for oversight, but it gets your process moving quickly, which is what we need given the retirement. So, I mean, if you're okay with that outcome, I'm okay with that outcome.
We can definitely do that, and we'll see what we see. We won't know until we ask the question. So,
what would be optimal for you in this situation? I know we're putting you in a tough spot. We're asking you if you're okay. Yep. You've got 3 different opinions. And also we're micromanaging slightly as it's a little outside of our purview here. But having said all that, or nothing at all.
Optimal is that he never retires.
Okay, good political answer.
Or maybe he tells us when he's going to retire. That would be helpful.
Yeah, I don't think we can move to have him not retire. So I think that we've got
right.
I've tried just about everything I can think of.
Our powers are limited there. So
he deserves it. It will be a well-earned retirement.
Is there something we can do to encourage him to at least announce a date? He's legally required 2 weeks.
No, he required 2 weeks. I don't please don't misunderstand me. It's not at all my intention to imply, that he's being less than forthcoming. I think he's still waiting for some information from WRS, and that he just genuinely doesn't know the date.
It's tricky. I mean, these things
yeah.
are very difficult for public employees, and that government takes a long time, and
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with multiple agencies. So I
Right.
don't think at all he's trying to be vague or that this is not uncommon.
So I guess are we at a point where we can make a motion on this, or I'm just cognizant we are halfway through the meeting and we have one more thing that we've already delayed once.
I would do what we generally do when we're not the experts and staff is, and kind of defer to them to help guide us in this position and give them options.
So I guess, Leanne, kind of queuing off of some of the comments that have been made, is it right now, is it good if we tell you, try to hire for this position, do it right away, bring it to the board for an authorization to hire if you find someone suitable? If not, we kick it back and we think about the hybrid kind of model. Does that work for you guys?
Yeah, and I think given the time that we are working in, I think that is probably the best way to approach this, is to not wait, not spend any more time, discussing, or at least discuss on a parallel track of actively recruiting.
Okay, well, given that, does anyone want to make a motion? Okay, I guess I'll try to make the motion. I move to have DPW post for the position. And if a suitable candidate is found, present to the village board for an authorization to hire.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think Trustee Backhorst a thumbs up. So motion carries 3-0. Thank you, Leanne, and look forward to hearing back on this. Now, next we have, well, I'm calling it performance metrics, but that's not the right word. So do you want to, Leanne, do you want to kick us off on this topic?
Sure. So this was another of the recommendations from the organizational analysis. And it's really twofold, I think. One of them is there was a recommendation that we begin or resume, I should say, our department annual reporting, which we have done. As you know, everyone has started doing that again. The second is more data metrics or performance metrics. And the sense I got in talking to the consultants, and I think that comes forth in the report, is that public works is fairly complex, right? And we tend to talk about it at a level that's up here, but there's a lot of work that goes on well below the general policy discussions that we have. And I think there's a thought that if we do a better job of communicating some of the day-to-day work to you, that increases your context for decision-making, helps with that understanding. But then there's also the idea that if we're collecting data and we can measure data, then we can measure performance. And when you can measure performance, you have set a process whereby you can improve that performance and measure that improvement. So I included a fair amount of stuff in your packet. I don't know that I'm really ready to discuss that in great detail, nor do I know if you want to discuss it in great detail. But I think really the direction that we were hoping to get from you if not tonight, at some point in the relatively near future, is, you know, the pile of data we've given you, does that tell you things you want to know? Are there other things that you might want to know that you don't see here that we can begin collecting data for? You know, obviously, a pile of numbers doesn't mean anything unless you have some context to it. And in a lot of cases, that context becomes multi-year reporting of the data. You know, I mentioned earlier that most of what we do is very, very seasonal. And, you know, a year that we have a light winter is phenomenally different than a year that we don't. Or a year that we don't have a lot of rain is very different than a year that we do. So it's really important that we have long periods of data collection in order to monitor those trends and sort of determine how that impacts operations. But that's a lot of talking. So gave you a lot of data in our annual reports, gave you some reading material about, you know, the different ways that you can use and measure that data. And I also threw in there the last copy of the performance metrics report that was previously done. I think that one is from 2017, perhaps. But I'm really just hoping to sort of listen in on your conversation about, you know, what kind of data you think is valuable to you in the role that you have. If we can collect it differently, or if we should collect different data, how you would use it, all those sorts of things.
Well, I can start if nobody else wants to. Well, I'll just throw out, you know, a couple things that I thought of, and these are kind of random thoughts, Leanne, it's the beginning of the conversation, but you know, I've seen a lot of numbers, and DPW does a nice job about kind of like total number of things that it's done, you know, in different categories. And, you know, we can look that stuff up. I mean, I would say from a thematic standpoint, though, like some of the stuff that we get questions on, you know, especially, you know, as the liaison to the conservation committee, are metrics that tie to conservation. So to the extent that we can stress and better build out those numbers, I think, you know, this is a community that you know, is very concerned about the environment. You know, I think it's fantastic. So to the extent that we see opportunities to build out metrics around kind of the environment and conservation, I think that's a good opportunity. The other thing that occurred to me is, you know, I was reading through I think it was the University of Tennessee, is that,
Yep.
Like these efficiency effectiveness pieces, those intrigued me. I don't know that I saw a ton of those and stuff that we're currently doing. And, you know, it's one of those things where I'm not trying to, don't read this as me thinking the DPW is not doing jobs effectively. I think the opposite. You can say, you know, we replaced, and they used potholes for one of their examples, so I'll use that. Because you could say we replaced 2,000 potholes this year, and they're all we didn't have to go back to any of them. You know, you can use it as a tool to say, you know, we've been very effective in the things that we do. So I think some of that, you know, I think we do a lot of, and again, I could tell me if I'm wrong here. I think we do a lot of stuff on the front end where we know kind of the count and the quantity of what we're doing. I think it would also be helpful to have some back end, you know, quality metrics. And, you know, I'm not again, I have nothing to think that those quality metrics would be off, but it would also show the DPW if there's any opportunities for improvement, and conversely, if the DPW is just across the board doing a great job. So I think that's what I was thinking as I read through this material, but certainly welcome the thoughts of others. Trustee Stuckrand, my screen just moved on me.
Yeah, so I guess too, you know, it's always interesting to see the different things, but I guess I was wondering too, like I was like, wow, look at recycling rate. It went from 2019 to 2020. That's the beginning of COVID is my guess. And so people are working at home and they're ordering from Amazon. And I think we had talked before, once you had told me that when the economy's going well, there's more garbage.
Yeah, always. Yep.
And so that's probably that number, but I guess it's a little bit, maybe it segues from Trustee Warren's point. So would it be useful to know how much time is spent on snow removal every year? Like, I don't know if you you know, and you could look at the weather and sort of the forecast and the way, you know, the snowfall for the year after. And does that help you at all in terms of planning? Because we expect our people to jump into a different seat so often and wear a different hat. Is it helpful to look at things like, I know you recorded waterman breaks, but do you segment by excuse me, by employee time? Like the mechanic spent 40 hours driving a snowplow this year. Is that helpful?
It can be, and we do track that, not necessarily on purpose, but just as a function of how our payroll system works. Just as some background, at the end of every day, each employee fills out a work log, and they have to record the time spent on each particular task they did. And so when we do payroll is done on a daily basis. Monica actually takes those work logs and enters them into the payroll system. So if an employee, and this is not at all uncommon, if an employee worked on 3 different things during the day, there are 3 separate entries into the payroll system. So we do track by task. So I can tell you exactly how many hours were spent plowing streets versus how many hours were spent clearing bus stops versus
like
how
the
many
village
hours.
attorney, you know, he bills billable hours for, you know, that's
Right.
very common, right? Okay.
Yep. And in some cases, it's very useful. For example, one of the performance metrics we have always reported is the ton of refuse per labor hour each year. Right. That gives us a good measure of it gives us some measure of efficiency when it's in a context to other years. Like the number by itself doesn't probably mean anything to anyone. But if you can compare it to years prior, then you can see, you know, are we getting more efficient? If we're not, is there an explanation for that? What sorts of things are going on there? Winter is really, really difficult. No 2 storm events are really alike in how we respond. The snow type will impact how we respond, you know, where it's a heavy and wet versus more of a powdery. The temperature will impact how we respond. Even bigger than that, the time of day is going to impact how we do or don't respond or deploy our resources.
Probably the day of the week.
The day of the week. Also, you know, we can spend just as many hours and just as much or more salt on like subsequent, you know, 1-2 inch events. Like if we have 3 of those in a week, we could very easily spend many hours and more salt than we would in a single event of 6 inches. Right. So it's really, it's a couple of years. I actually tried to put together some data where I compared the hours versus the total annual snowfall, and the gap there, or the scale difference was so huge that the charts looked like the total annual snowfall compared to the hours. No matter what the annual snowfall, it was just a flat line at 0, like just because of the difference in the scale of the reporting. And I've looked, I won't tell you that I've spent years of my life looking, but I've spent many hours looking. And I haven't yet stumbled across a community that I thought really had nailed the way you report your winter response, your snowfall, your hours, your salt use from year to year, because it's so different based on the weather and all those other factors. It's just tough.
And Leanne, that kind of ties to a question for like, what's the time for what is the meter on the reporting? You know, you had mentioned monthly, I think quarterly, semi-annually. I mean, I guess maybe this question for us to answer. What would you think, or maybe no, I think that, you know, what would be most educational for us? You know, I think part of the question is how often do you come to a committee with, you know, these kind of how do we A, what do we want to see in the reports, and B, how often do we receive them? And I mean, I guess I guess, and I'm sorry, I see a really long-winded way of saying, I wouldn't want to get a report and then a month later have basically the same report. I was thinking probably quarterly would make the most sense. Is that square with your thinking?
Yeah, I
was even
think
thinking
that does.
biannually,
Okay, that
every
I
6
could,
months.
Or that.
I mean,
I think quarterly nicely captures seasonality. So, from that respect, that's good. A lot of our tasks are, really, I think quarterly is a good snapshot of many of our tasks, not all of them. We collect the data we collect monthly just because that's how we've been set up to do it. And have always reported annually, but there's been some discussion about this concept called a dashboard, where we just have data and it's kind of updated regularly, and you get a snapshot. The difficulty there is you don't really have a context to compare it to, but certainly not opposed to doing that. Like I said, we collect, we collect a ton of data. So I don't have any issues or concerns with reporting it to you at whatever time interval you think is most useful. I just want to, I want to give you what will be useful to you.
yeah, from my perspective, I mean, I could be quarterly or semi-annually, both of them seem fine to me. I mean, I do take your point about kind of the seasons and you'd be reporting basically after every season, but also I don't want to overdo it and like take a ton of like make you work up reports every 4 times as opposed to 2 times, if really we can just cover 2 seasons each time we do this. So I'm okay. I guess I'm okay with either one.
I think depending on the format of how we report it to you, that just becomes plug and play. I mean, I'm not overly concerned about that.
Well, I guess what I would say then, Trustee Warren, can I speak?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I'm walking in my car from my office, so forgive me. So I would say, what makes sense to you, Leanne, for now, until we kind of work our groove, is where we should start, instead of us kind of, throwing darts at a sheet of paper. I mean, I love all the suggestions, but it's, that's where I would go with that, to make it simple. What makes sense for reporting, if it's seasonally, if it's quarterly, I understand you're looking for direction from us, but I think I'm at least looking for some from you guys.
Okay. I guess and thank you for that. I think if there are pieces of information that you think would be useful to you in the role that you play in the job that you do, that you don't see us collecting, or at least that we haven't reported to you, I think we'd want to know that, so that we can determine whether we have the means to collect that data, or how we would adjust our record keeping in order to be able to collect that so that it can be reported to you.
Trustee Stokebrand?
So you had asked that you wanted task areas prioritized. So I guess the ones that you have shown us are fine in my view. It'll be easy to understand, because you do so many projects with so many, multiple contractors, and sometimes you're the secondary one, because of the MMSD project, right? That's theirs, but you will still need to be involved. And so I'm wondering if, with the hiring of this new construction manager, his or her position will pretty much show us how much department time is spent on various big projects. And we'll be able to look and see how many of them are generated by our village and how many are generated by MMSD or the State Department of Transportation, if it's the redo of Lake Drive. So I'm wondering, just like by having that new person doing this construction management job, we'll be able to see more about staff time spent on projects that aren't even our projects. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I think that, the big ones you always know about. I think examples of where we spend time on projects that aren't ours, quite honestly, that occurs on a fairly regular basis. And that would be Joel's time. related
And what I guess what I'm
to,
saying is that's, none of that's in those charts that you sent us.
no, because frankly, the charts that I sent you really relate to time spent by our field staff. The Joel, Joel and I don't track hours through payroll the way they do, since we're salaried employees. I don't have to sit down at the end of every day and write down the 18 different things I worked on today. So no, we don't currently track our time that
Do
way.
you think that would be helpful for the department? I mean, I'm just saying, if we ever get to succession plan.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful. Helpful might not be the word I want to use. I think it might be interesting for you to really have some evidence or some information on just how many different things Joel and I do on a daily basis. As far as how it's helpful to the department, I guess indirectly it's helpful if it helps you understand our operations, but a direct impact on departmental operations, that's a little bit of I would have a hard time drawing that specific line.
I think it's an interesting concept. I would just worry, this is the lawyer in me talking. I would worry about, you don't want to create a situation where you guys are kind of over recording taking like a full afternoon I remember back in the days when I billed hours, I would take all of Friday afternoon to bill my hours, and it was a time consuming experience. So we'd want to, if we ever did an exercise like that, we'd want to make sure it was efficient for you guys. And, it was like an hour long exercise as opposed to like a full half day of like, what did you hear? What I do? Like, just a very much a snapshot. I think it's an interesting concept, but again, I wouldn't want you guys to get too overburdened with doing it. I'd want to right size it, I guess what I'm trying to say.
I guess that when it comes to, you want a direction on task areas prioritized. I guess I would just start with, health and safety first. I mean, is that helpful to you, Leanne?
Yes and no. I mean, the vast majority of what we do is health and safety related. So, I think for, let's say, as an example, we have data related to all of our collections. So we have refuse data, we have compost data, we have recycling data, we have data related to the hours that are spent doing each of those tasks. Is that a priority area for you that we continue to collect that data? Is there other data that you might think of or want to see that we could determine how or if we could collect? Are you, we never have report in a totally different arena. We've never reported to you, though we report regularly to DNR and EPA, any of our water testing and water sampling results and data. We've always been in compliance, so maybe the particulars aren't of interest to you, but maybe they are. I don't know. So when I asked for priorities related to task area, I was kind of going in that direction. But I realize this is a difficult question to ask because what I've placed in front of you, but you don't necessarily know the layer that
you don't know
that you don't see on a daily basis that I do. So this is a recommendation of the study. So I just wanted to make sure that we have this discussion, that you feel comfortable with the data that we're collecting, or if you believe there is other data that we could be collecting, or areas that you would like us to dive deeper into so we can do some of those sort of back end quality metrics that Trustee Warren referenced earlier in our discussion.
One other thing I wanted to throw into the mix before, and sorry to return to kind of the same theme, is it worth, I don't know if it's too late for this, but talking to Conservation Committee about this? I mean, there are a lot of good, there's a lot of good data points in this, but I know, over the 2 years I've been on Conservation Committee, that periodically we'll have, do we have a data on this? Do we have data on this? Can we have DPW pull this? So it might be worth just a conversation with them to say, hey, what
Sure.
data do you think we're missing? Because I think they might have some suggestions if we can get that, work with, I think Tyler does that. I think that's
Yes, he does.
the mix.
Yeah,
Yeah,
happy to do
trying not to
that.
mix up my committees. Yeah, it might be worth getting a 20-minute discussion with them on it.
Sure.
Great
Happy to do that.
suggestion. Yeah, I love that suggestion. Thank you.
You said you didn't find it to be really beneficial to track snow removal for a season.
Joel does a phenomenal job of tracking lots of different types of data by storm event. So he has actually, Joel, are you listening?
Yep, I'm still here.
You want to tell him about your snow event report?
I mean, I'm just saying, I see we have DPW, like gallons of fuel used. And, for me, hours spent with employees in plows, probably, I mean, maybe I could extrapolate fuel gallons used by gallon by type, diesel, gasoline. I got to say, that's not really, maybe the Conservation Committee would find that useful. I would, it'd be more interesting to me to know staff hours every season spent from November through April on snow removal. And I understand it's subjective based upon Mother Nature every year.
But
yeah,
we can definitely add, I will definitely add that back to the report.
If you're doing it anyway, I don't want to add something.
Yeah, no.
I gotta, especially people in COVID, this is probably something they'd be interested in. They'd look at the DPW. You could get more likes if you put. Anyway, I think it would be interesting for me to see from an employee standpoint the other thing, I think refuse, it's the interesting one was that it really went up. And so I just will be interesting to track that in the year going forward to see how COVID continues to affect your refuse.
I actually can give you refuse tonnage back probably at least 20 or more years.
Wow.
Yeah.
One thing that I know, and I don't know if I saw this within the document itself, pardon me if I missed it, but I can tell you almost as a certainty, and I can't speak for the committee, but I'm guessing that they'll be interested in salt usage.
Yep, then that is in there.
Okay, yeah, I must have just missed it, but that's.
Or it's supposed to be in there.
Yeah.
It's there, and it's very impressive how it's gone down. And I wonder, that is when you started doing the brining?
Yeah, there it is. Okay, got it. Yeah,
Yes, that certainly helps.
Just
but
here?
it's we can have the most efficient and high, most technologically up to date winter operations fleet with every gadget and gizmo related to salt reduction in the world. But if we get ice storms or lots of little events, that will help, but we could still have years that it looks like it's more salt use than the year before if you have twice as many events. So
well, I was really impressed, and I just noticed it only goes through December. So now I'm not impressed anymore.
yeah, I was gonna point that. It's like, yeah, we believe it or not, didn't we have like no snow through December? Like hard to believe that.
We had very we responded to several events, but yeah, nothing like we've seen over the last month. No.
Yeah, that number is not going to look so great once we import these 3 months.
Probably not. No.
So, Leanne, does anyone else have anything? Leanne, do you have everything you need? I mean, we kind of. I like that we've had kind of a global kind of all over the place a little bit, but in a good way discussion. I know this is not, there's not agenda size for a motion. Do you have kind of some of the direction that you need?
Yeah, I think so.
Anybody else? Trustee Backhorst, Trustee Stokebrand?
No, and I do hope that the gentleman has a wonderful retirement. It's well deserved, and I hope that there's some way to mark the event for the village.
We'll do that in a responsible manner, yes.
Yeah, and I'm still here, by the way. I agree. I think this is great, and I'm glad to hear that you have the direction you need. I'm driving, so forgive me, guys. I am still here, so all right.
We see your name. We don't see you, but we see your name. Okay, well, Leanne, do we have anything else? Is there another item on the agenda?
No, there is not.
I was very grateful for that University of Tennessee document.
Yeah.
It looks a lot of good stuff for me to digest.
Yeah,
think
I thought so too, which was why I included it. I dumb luck, just stumbled across it and thought, wow, this is good stuff. So
thank you.
All right, well,
Would you like a motion to adjourn?
yeah,
Trustee
15 minutes to eat dinner. So I'll take a motion.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second that. Motion to adjourn, seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you both, Joel and Leanne.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.